this is Cheryl Marlene. Welcome to Spiritual Deep Dive. In a recent Akashic Record Insights session, I explored the origins of the 7 Hermetic principles through the Akashic Records, responding to the question, what is the point of origin of the 7 Hermetic laws and where are they cultivated from? These principles, the 7 Hermetic laws, like other spiritual frameworks, originate from humanity's collective quest to understand existence and interconnectedness. Here's our discussion. What is the point of origin and from whom cultivated the 7 Hermetic laws?
As above, so below, everything is vibration.
Right, like from the Emerald Tablet, right? That's where that's at least some part of the origin of some of that.
Yeah.
They've become more, I don't know, specific over time. Okay, but let me ask about this. So something like the 7 Hermetic laws, and there would be other things like what are called the 8 limbs of yoga, or the 8 limbs of not yoga, but of Buddha. And not that those are the same things, right? That's not what they're getting ready to say. It could even go into, like, say, the 10 Commandments from the Bible and from the Torah. What you have there is ideas and thoughts, which in our modern sense may be identified with a particular source. They all come out of, let's say, a collective energy of understanding of both what it means to be human and what it means to be connected in the way that we are as humans with all that is, with the universe, with whatever the broadest reach you want to think about. Are reflective of the human desire to understand, like those typical questions, like who am I? Why am I here? Am I good enough? Would be at least one way to generally summarize the primary motivations of a human being. And so something like the 7 Hermetic laws come out of a particular history of humanity dealing with what it means to be alive on Earth and dealing with the shifts and changes that happen energetically, both just in terms of the way human life is led, to a perception of what both gives foundation to the vision quest of knowing yourself, to know thyself. At the same time, it's a framing of how one is also then connected through and across the social order. So it also then is dealing with that, basically that like 4th question in a sense, which is, how do I live with all of these people? And maintain a sense of who I am. And that it also comes, part of the reason why those questions are there is because there's always been a fundamental quest within humanity to understand how to deal with that, like with the unknown, with what feels like is mystery, which is transcendent, which is, more, that sense that there is something more than me has been a part of humanity for a very, very long time. And so, for example, the 7 Hermetic laws make an attempt at quantifying that understanding, that ability to interact and understand the world and self.
So I would take that as a man or a woman's construct of looking at the spaces between the spectrum of static energy and dynamic energy, and putting a meaning behind each of these principles to make sense of the energetics and the principles that the universe, both births and dies, is that, birth and death, and then it lives within the realms of these different Hermetic principles.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, so for some people, this explains it all. For other people, it doesn't quite get to it, or it's missing, or, whatever, but because they take a different perspective on it. But overall, it's meant to help give like framework and foundation to your experience of being human, and a way and a framework and a foundation to be able to answer, those basic questions of like, who am I? Why am I here? Am I good enough? Can I get along with everybody else?
And would that apply to things such as like last night chakras and all of that? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and essentially it also applies to what we would call religions and other kinds of spiritual traditions. I mean, all of that is focused on being able, at least minimally, to provide enough structure that you're not worried about it. You're coming into more of a comfort level. But they would also say that, especially in the last 2,000 to 3,000 years, a whole lot of that has been filtered through the power dynamics that we live within, which is that, the mind and the body are deemed superior to the heart and the soul, and that there is that perspective that the best way to deal with all of this is to obtain control and power over everybody else. That's the way you can set up an environment where those that are in control, those that are dominant, are able to get what they want, while using their promise of protection as a reason to be able to do what they want to do when they want to do it. So there's a lot about current religious and spiritual traditions that actually end up being based on power over power under dynamics, as opposed to the possibilities of power with and power within dynamics. So as you learn about stuff, part of it is to be aware of the potential for anything to come out of that concept of power dynamics. And it's why a whole lot of all of it's changing right now, is because more and more, as we move away from the dominance of the mind and the body over the heart and soul, and we move into the integration of body, mind, heart, and soul. A lot of, let's say, spiritual ideas that might have worked for us, I don't know, even just 50 years ago, 25 years ago, don't really work now, because as you become more conscious of what you can do to empower yourself and to choose consciously power with and power within, it starts to break down the efficacy and the ability to control and manipulate that power over has been enjoying for quite some time. And then if you bring in the idea of the static versus the dynamic, so the static is basically always looking at things from, let's say, a linear point of view. And so time is past, present, and future. And, more or less, we're talking about 3 dimensions of space, right? So you've got 4 dimensions there. You have, essentially height, width, and length plus time. That perspective, while there's a lot of good that comes out of it, is, and it's there mainly because that's what our human agreements agree to, is that we agreed to, essentially arrange ourselves based on that linear perspective. Let's say from the transcendent point of view, from that which is beyond this physical environment, and like what most people would think of as, of the divine, of God, it has a dynamic point of view. It's not limited by the linear perspective. It's not limited by three dimensions of space. It sees it from the point of view of the infinite and the eternal, so that there's no limit to time and there's no limit to space. And when you begin to look at things from that transcendent point of view, then there's different things that will shift or different ways of looking at things. So like even the laws, you could go through all seven of those and rework them within, let's say, a dynamic point of view, and it would bring you to at least a slightly different understanding, if not a completely different understanding. But looking at them from a linear point of view is still, it's not that that's wrong or anything. It's just that it's a particular perspective, and in that perspective, incredibly helpful for understanding who you are and how you are connected to the universe.
How would they suggest defining it?
You mean how would they suggest defining the seven Hermetic principles?
Correct. Because you're saying humans look at it as a static view.
Right.
You're kind of under through it, but succinctly, how would you say they would explain it or, feel about it?
So there's a couple of ways that it could be done. One is simply like part of it is just to ask the question, like, what is mentalism? What is correspondence? What is vibration? Like that. You could do it that way. And what you're going to get doing it that way, and that's asking the records those questions. What you're going to get, they're saying, from that, doing it that way, is more of a dynamic interpretation of those seven ideas. Then what they would suggest that you do is you could ask the question, like, what is the dynamic perspective of this principle? Because there's, part of it is that, like, when you go from static to dynamic, kind of one of the things that you're doing is, in a certain sense, you're going, I know this is a hierarchical description and it's not really meant to be that, but we're linear people. So it's the way you talk about it, which is, when you go from static to dynamic, in a certain sense, what you're doing is you're changing the level of your view. So the linear perspective, the static perspective, can be, like, say, at the 1,000-foot level, and the dynamic view is more up into the like, say, the 100,000-foot level. And what you can see from that 100,000-foot level gives you a different perspective on what you see at the 10,000-foot level. And that's why, from the dynamic point of view, it might not be the principle of mentalism. It may be the principle of something else, like the principle of soul clarity, like they're saying, for example, and that you describe that in a different way. That's something that they're more than willing to do, but it's too much to do it right now.
Oh yeah, no,
yeah.
I'm not.
But and I'm saying, for me personally, I find that incredibly fascinating, and would be something that I would absolutely be excited and thrilled to do.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Because part of it is, they can give like definitions and stuff like that, but it would be helpful, like, say, for me to do that, for example, is to have a little more clarity on what is meant by each of those.
Mm-hmm.
So that the questions that go back to the records about it kind of take in that understanding, and then that creates the foundation in the format to be able to shift it into a dynamic expression.
Yeah, I love that. It'd be fun to do it as a class and take one a week.
Yes, it would be. So, and it's actually something I've thought about doing, but
cool. I appreciate that. And I like how you said soul clarity with principle of mentalism. because that's essentially what it is. It filters in through the mind. It's really what is our soul's clarity on the situation. And, I'd really rather look at the penthouse point of view in my life anymore. I'd rather not be on the first floor. So I like that as well.
Yeah, well, it's, a couple of years ago, I did this actually with the Ten Commandments. And part of it is because out there are several examples of the Ten Commandments in English. I just looked in English, didn't look in other languages, but of of people already having started that process of 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 translating those. Let's just say to translating them from a static to a dynamic point of view. And it's really interesting what you get. And part of why that's also interesting is because, like, say, the Ten Commandments became a thing before, or well, it's maybe slightly before. It depends on how they're saying it depends on what you want to call the beginning of all of this. But it came from a time where that shift that I've talked about from that shift into the human agreements of the mind and body over the heart and soul began somewhere about, if we say it started 3,000 years ago, then that's approximately, 1,000 BCE, more or less, right? And so part of it is to ask the question, well, what were we coming from when that shift began? And what we were coming from was a period of time where we enjoyed the integration of body, mind, heart, and soul. And from our current perspective, we would say that that was a period that was much more mystical in characteristics than it has been, than human experience has been over the last 3,000 years. So that the Ten Commandments, and the thing is that the Hermetic principles also can be traced back, that especially through the experience of Egypt. And so that means that those are things that are coming out of a mystical integrated perspective, and then being brought into an environment that has that separation. And that's what moves it into a static point of view, and why a lot of that has been, because it lost its layers of meaning and understanding when it went through that. And so partly what's happening, part of what comes out of the motion of moving your awareness when you can into a sort of a dynamic point of view, it means that you're adding back those layers that essentially have been lost. I mean, actually, they weren't lost, but the esoteric forms of, particularly like, say, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all have esoteric traditions where a lot of that layered understanding ended up. So we haven't really lost it. It just hasn't been a part of the mainstream of religion and spiritual traditions. So like the Kabbalah would be that esoteric version in Judaism. Sufism would be that esoteric tradition in Islam. And the Christian esoteric things went in a couple of different places, but essentially are those groups that were called heretics, right? The word heretic was actually for a group of people who had the audacity to believe that they could interpret the word of God for themselves. And so the word heretic became synonymous with those that reject Christianity, right? They're not doing it right. So like the Essenes, oh God, who were the people up on the, but then it also, and then it also began the parts that develop some of the what are usually referred to as like secret societies, like the Rosicrucians. That's where a lot of the Christian esoteric strain went, is into those things. Even the Freemasons, had different developments over time. It's a very, like we could spend months just on that. But anyway, they're just saying that's so a lot of what's happening right now, and why there is so much interest in like saying understanding who you are spiritually, is that when you begin to really get into that integration and experience the integration of your body, mind, heart, and soul, you feel connection more than you feel division and separation. And so it's like you end up kind of wanting to like reinterpret for yourself, what's life about? And that's why there is all of this interest in all of these different, like the 7 Hermetic principles, or, like the 4 agreements, right? The Stephen Covey's The 7 Principles of, successful. I mean, even though that was more of a business perspective, all of that is about bringing in a much broader perspective to understanding who you are, why you are here, if you're good enough, and how you're going to get along with everybody. So, did that answer your question, Cassie?
Yeah, that was great. It's like I kind of know the answer, but I'm just kind of curious, what are some other paint colors I can connect the dots on? So it's great. Yeah. I think it'll be a fun class sometime.
Yeah. I will contemplate this. Yep. There's just so much fun. Thank you for listening. This has been an episode of Spiritual Deep Dive. For more, visit spiritualdeepdive.com or my website, cherylmarlene.com. To join our weekly Akashic Record Insights workshop, go to akashicrecordinsights.com.